How do we respond when we're faced with difficulties in our lives? How do we position ourselves before God when everything around us seems hopeless? Most of our prayers tend to just be asking God to get us out of trouble, to heal the sickness, to provide for the need, to stop the slanders and the attacks against us. And it's a good thing. We ought to take our cares and our concerns before the Lord. But for the heart that seeks to know God, for the person who longs to really walk closely with Him, there's so much more. Suffering for that person is not just something to get rid of, it's an opportunity to meet God. Joni Eareckson Tada is a Bible teacher who has been in a wheelchair for the past 56 years because of an accident that left her paralyzed from the neck down. And she says this, God is never closer to you than when your heart is aching. She says the greatest good that suffering can do for me is to increase my capacity for God. Elizabeth Elliot, who lost her husband to a brutal attack by the very people they were seeking to reach with the gospel, says, in my own life, I can honestly say that out of the deepest pain has come the strongest conviction of the presence of God and of the love of God. King David would agree with them. And in today's reading from Psalms 140 to 142, we see a number of important principles about pursuing the Lord in the midst of great trouble. Number one, we need to remember who we are and what is the purpose of our life. David wasn't just a regular guy asking God to help him make it through life as he sought to achieve his goals. David was the king of Israel, set apart and chosen by God to lead the people of God for the purposes of God in the ways of God. Everything he faced was seen in light of those purposes. So the first thing we need to do is to view our suffering through the lens of our identity and our calling as children of God. Number two, we need to remember who He is. In Psalm 140, David prays with confidence because he says in verse 6, you are my God. You are the strength of my salvation. You have been faithful before, and I know that you will be faithful again. And the result of God's faithfulness is not the absence of pain, it's the presence of God. Verse 13, he says, surely the righteous will give thanks to you. The upright will dwell in your presence. Number three, we need to open our hearts to God to allow Him to work in us through our suffering. Psalm 141, David is not only asking the Lord to change his circumstances, he's asking the Lord to change his heart. He says, guard my mouth from speaking evil. Keep my heart from doing evil, and open my heart to receive loving rebuke and correction. And in everything, he says, Lord, my eyes are towards you. Number four, we need to pour out our hearts completely before Him. In Psalm 142, you can just hear David's desperation. He says, I pour out my complaint to Him. There is no one who cares about my life. There is no escape for me. I have been brought low by those who are way too strong for me. When we go to the Lord, we don't try to impress Him with spiritual sounding words or to make Him think that we have more faith than we actually do. We don't pretend that it doesn't hurt. We don't pretend that we're not afraid. We lay it all out honestly before Him. And finally, number five, we surrender to Him with confidence in His heart and with trust in His sovereign care. David says in verse 3, when I was overwhelmed within me, when I didn't know where to go, he says, you knew the way that I was going. That sounds a lot like Job in Job 23 when he says, I look in every direction, but I can't see the Lord. I don't know where He's going. I don't know what He's doing, but He knows the way that I go. And when He brings me through this, I will come out as pure as gold. David has that same confidence. He prays in verse 7, bring my soul out of prison so that I may give thanks to your name. He knows that will be the outcome. And what he's saying is, I don't know how you're going to work, and I don't know when you're going to work, but I know that you will not leave me alone. And I know that through all of this, you will show your goodness to me.